Hello and welcome to our discussion of practice exercise number 2 for the accounting equation number puzzle. Now that's the name I like to give these types of problems because they give you certain numbers, certain amounts, and they want you to calculate the missing amounts. Now this particular practice exercise tests your knowledge of the accounting equation. So remember that accounting equation is assets equals liabilities plus equity. Now the thing about that accounting equation, we normally think of that as the balances. We figure that assets of a certain balance must equal the liabilities plus equity. Now that would certainly work very obviously for the beginning balance. It would also work for the ending balance. But the thing you may not notice right off the bat is that it also has to work for the changes. Any changes to that accounting equation, the assets, liabilities, or equity, must meet that same equation. In other words, if you're increasing assets by a certain amount, you have to be increasing liabilities plus equity by that same amount. Otherwise, there's no way your ending balance will stay in balance as well. So this type of problem, it looks very daunting at first because it only gives you a handful of numbers. And as you can see here, it's asking for many, many more missing numbers. So at first glance, it looks like, hey, there's no way we're going to be able to do this. But we'll see that we can. Now, in addition to the amounts that are given to you in the basic accounting equation, notice that there's also a check figure here for total stockholders' equity, as well as one for dividends. They're telling you how many dividends were paid throughout the year. And I should say declared and paid, because really declared is what we're going to be more concerned with retained earnings. You'll learn that in later discussions there, but I should change that there just to clarify. So the core accounting equation is right here, but notice that we have a little section that I'm calling the equity breakdown, because this particular problem actually gives you nothing with equity, nothing in the equation. Yes, it gives you total right here, but it gives you nothing here. But it does tell you how certain things have changed, or certain balances of certain types of equity, what they were. Now remember, total equity has two components, paid in capital plus retained earnings. So this is where we're going to work to get our total equity number. Beginning plus changes equals ending. So when you first look at this problem, you can see a couple of different things you could try to work first. The most obvious piece here would be the ending balance of liabilities. We know the beginning plus the change, so we can just add those two together. We get $204,800 would be our ending liabilities. So, hey, we have one column done, two to go. We can't really do anything with assets yet. We only know the change. We don't know either balance. And that's kind of a rule for any of these equations. You have to know 2 out of the 3 to get the third. You either know beginning and changes to get ending, or you know beginning and ending to back into changes. Also, with the assets, liabilities, and equity, you have to know 2 of them to get the third. So that's where you have to kind of work through this problem to figure out what can we pull out. Now the next piece, again, you can go a couple of ways, but since they gave us total stockholders' equity, I'm going to move it over to this column right here because that's what that number was. That's total stockholders' equity. So I'm going to move it over there. Now notice when you have this type of problem, as soon as you start adding another piece in, a lot of times it'll open up a new piece that you can calculate. And that's exactly what's going on with the ending. Now, we know ending equity, we know ending liabilities, we know that assets must equal the sum of those two. So 204,800 plus 398,800, that tells us our ending balance of assets must be 603,600. So now, again, we've opened up another piece here. Now we can work the beginning assets. We know ending, we know changes. We know the beginning has to be smaller than the ending because we've added some money to it. So the way to work this would be take ending balance minus changes, and the beginning has to be 456,800. The good thing is, once you get that, it's probably a good idea to just double check and work it forward. And yes, indeed, 456,800 plus 146,800 does equal 603,600. So we have that. The other piece that's very good here is now all of a sudden we've opened up the two equities. We know assets and liabilities at both the beginning level and the changes level. So now equity, it has to be assets minus liabilities. That way, liabilities plus equity can give us the assets. And again, if you think you've done something wrong, just make sure to add them together and make sure it makes sense. So again, I'm saying assets. We're subtracting liabilities because we're trying to find the missing piece of equity. So there we have $132,000 of changes. So really we're done with the basic accounting equation, but we want to go over here and work this equity breakdown as well. So with paid in capital, we know we started with 21,000. We're ending at 129,400. So we know that the total change must be an increase between the two. We had to have added 108,400. If we go over to retained earnings, that's all we have left now. We're trying to find all the detail of retained earnings. We know that our ending balance was 129,400 for paid in capital. We know that total equity had to be 398,800. So it must be the difference between those two. We must have 269,400 in ending equity. Retained earnings beginning balance would be the same thing. It must be equity minus the paid in capital of 21,000. We must have 245,800 in beginning retained earnings. Now we're down to the last two pieces. By the way, these last columns, these are details. This would explain what portion of retained earnings we're calculating. So in this case, we know that retained earnings, the changes would be related to net income or dividends. You go through that retained earnings statement. So beginning retained earnings plus net income minus dividends would give us ending retained earnings. That's what I'm trying to say here. Now the good news is we were given dividends. It told us we had $55,000. Now remember, that's got to be a negative number because we're subtracting it out. So we're down to one piece in this overall puzzle. We need to know what net income it would take to get us to an increase, a net increase, to get us to the higher ending retained earnings balance. So mathematically, there are a few ways to do this, or even formulaically. You could do something on the side if you're just dealing with pencil and paper, or you can do it in Excel if you have that. What we basically need to do is start at the end. So I'm going to put a formula here using the ending balance, and then I'm going to reverse the dividend change and the beginning equity. In other words, I'm going to subtract them. Now we're subtracting a negative here, which ends up adding the number. I'm going to subtract out retained earnings to get the final number, 78,600 net income. Now again, when you first look at that formula, it might seem a little jumbled. So it's one of those you'd want to double check to make sure you have the right number in the end. The other way to think about this, well, first of all, if we do this, if we just add these three together, including the fact that we're adding a negative, so subtracting the number, you'll notice that our sum down here does indeed equal 269,400. The other way to work that problem, though, just if you're doing it on the side, is that you know the net difference between retained earnings had to have been 23,600, but you already had a negative dividend. So you know your net income is going to need to be higher than that dividend. It's going to need to offset that dividend plus add in 23,600. In other words, it's going to have to be 55,000 plus 23,600, which again gives us this 78,600. So when you work that problem forward, you just want to make sure that you did indeed get the 269,400, which we did. So we're good to go with this problem. Now, when you're dealing with these textbook type problems or whatever software you may be dealing with, it may be given to you in different ways. So you need to take a look at what we've learned here today and figure out how to apply it to your particular situation. But this at least should give you some tips on how to move forward with this type of problem. Hopefully this has helped. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to talking to you in the next video.